Live at the Math Shack with Mr. Shack. Another episode, well, just our second episode, the Swagged Up Math. And today we're going to be covering some of my favorite concepts and topics. Especially, they're my favorite because I feel like students struggle the most with them. And these standards are referred to as expressions and equations when you Google them. But in my opinion, they should just be called straight up algebra, because that's what we're doing, and that way kids can understand the significance of it. And I think the word algebra is sometimes a fear that needs to be overcame early. So the earlier we push it out, because that's exactly what, it's not like we're lying to the kids, that's exactly what we're doing. One of the things I wanted to point out when I looked up these standards deal with word problems, real life situations where kids have to take word problems and turn them into equations. But when you read the standard, they chose to use the variables P, X, Q, and R. And for me, that brings my second frustration with how this information is being presented to middle schoolers, because we, in my opinion, variables don't matter. We can agree on that. So let's just use the variables that they're going to eventually see in high school anyway. So I push for my kids, 7th graders who don't know how to graph. We don't graph in 7th grade, but I push them to use y equals mx plus b. And I'm going to get further into that in 1 second, but just make sure that you understand the standards that's being covered. That's always important to me. We need to know what we're learning and exactly how we're going to tackle it. So let's bring you over here to this other board where I'm going to break down the significance of y equals mx plus b and how it can help students tackle a cluster of problems, not just one problem, but a cluster of problems. And it also is very vertical with its learning, because even though our kids don't graph, they still need to understand this equation, they need to memorize it, need to understand the significance of it, mathematically and in real life terms, which is challenging for most students that are 13 and 14 years old, that are not working, they're not putting down payments on cars, they're not having base salaries with commission. So these problems are conceptually hard and they're also mathematically hard, so it's a double fight. So we want to try to fight it on both ends. So I practice and I teach my kids the mathematical definition of each variable, but more importantly, I teach them how these variables correlate to real life, because in real life, we use other words to identify slope, y-intercept, the y, and the x. They all have different meanings in terms of real life. It could be money, it could be apples, it could be oranges. Y is always our total amount, total cost, total price. That's in real life and mathematically. Mathematically, M is always our slope. Slope can be challenging for some students, but for 7th graders, all you need to know is M is slope. You don't need to really push it any further, because 7th graders don't graph. For my 8th graders that are graphing, you can still use this, because word problems are very challenging to even students that may know how to graph. Graphing is its own beast. So you want to take chunks of this thing away at a time, so by the time you get to high school, it's a breeze, and by the time you get to college, it's just a review. So mathematically, M is slope, but in real life, words that you'll see in word problems that will help you identify the slope are words like rate. A rate is basically the same amount over the same period of time. Other words you'll see that help you identify slope are each, a. Each shirt costs $10. A shirt costs $10. Every, monthly, weekly. Weekly, you get paid $150 a week. That's the same amount over the same amount of time. Yearly, annually. And one that I love that I forgot was per. $10 per shirt. Per means one. A lot of my students forget that per actually means, it's reference to a number. Per means one. X, I've been pushed by one of my great colleagues, Mr. Adair, to not forget about X, because often I just tell kids, well, X is whatever we are looking for. If you look at the last sentence in the question, that'll represent the unit of X. If they're asking how many cars did they watch over, how many cars did they wash over a certain period of time, that X would be the number of cars, if that makes any sense. Moving along to finally B. B represents the y-intercept. Now, those are my students that understand graphing, and some of my parents that may be watching with their sons and daughters that remember graphing. Y-intercept is just the point on the y-axis where the line crosses. So, for a 7th grader, that's somewhat irrelevant. They just need to know that B is the y-intercept. That's the mathematical term for B. But in real life, the y-intercept is a lot of different things. It can be an initial amount, and that could be money, apples, oranges, a down payment, if you ever hear anything about it, because that is a starting amount as well. Any one-time fee. Activation fee is a one-time fee because you only pay it one time. And as they begin to throw more and more word problems at you, these word problems will become more difficult, and you'll have to be able to figure out what is that one-time fee, or what is that amount of money that's being spent one time, and what's the amount of money that's happening again and again over a course of time. So activation fee, base salary, and for a 7th grader who has never had a salary, he's never had a job, he doesn't understand how a base salary is the starting. That is how much you make at the starting point, and whatever else as far as commission goes. So even though 7th graders can't possibly, some of them may not be able to wrap their mind around that, if we could get them to apply it to this equation, I think it simplifies things for them. So base salary, and I think I'm going to stop there. And next I'm going to get into one of these word problems. We'll be right back.